Thomas, badge number 10847. Today's date's May 16th, 2020. Time is 01:14 hours, or 1:14 a.m. I'm here with Trooper McGeary.
Badge number 1287.
So, tonight, or I know it's tomorrow technically, but yesterday, last night, were you at home?
Yes.
Okay. So, kind of walk me through what happens.
Okay. Now, my son and I just got back from Sharon, PA.
Okay.
At about 11:30, and my wife had eaten dinner, got in her shower, and was going to bed.
Okay.
My son and I
Where coming from, or?
Well, we knew it was coming from this direction, but to me it sounded pretty muffled. Okay, I've been in the military, and I fired a lot of guns.
Right.
I don't know if somebody uses a suppressor, and I do know that there is somebody in the neighborhood that does have one.
Who's that?
Well, I don't want to give the name because I don't want to end up like that guy.
Yeah, I understand that, but, I mean...
I will say he lives up here on Shaw Street, and, okay, I'll give you his first name, that's all I know, and his name is Mike. I even have a picture of the weapon that,
Is Mike a white or black guy?
he's a black guy. I was drinking vodka with him. He showed me this gun.
You weren't drinking vodka with him tonight, were you?
No, no.
Titanic car 2, old radio.
Welcome to Sunset Secrets. Michael D. Miller of the PSP arrives on scene, and one of his first duties, he is said to take Alex Bix and himself and head on down to Two Cousins convenience store. It was roughly at about 1:30 a.m. On 5/16. Him and Officer Bitts of Aliquippa Police Department responded to Cousins convenience store to locate any surveillance video that showed all vehicles coming from Keel Street onto Franklin Avenue at the time of the incident. Again, this was said to have happened at 1:30 in the morning. Miller wrote up a report, and the date of action was not dated, and the action was to obtain video surveillance. This would be the report that Miller wrote up of him and Officer Bitts going to Two Cousins convenience store to locate any surveillance video. While Two Cousins convenience store closed at midnight, and while other people were getting interviewed by McGeary and Thomas, the witnesses were getting interviewed, it is said that Miller and Bitts head on down to Two Cousins convenience store to monitor the video at Two Cousins and to look at surveillance between 11:31 and 11:45 p.m. The report does not note anybody that answered the door, a name of the owner or manager of Two Cousins. Again, they had said to went down there at 1:30 a.m. This was during COVID, and Two Cousins convenience store closed at midnight. And then they chain it all up. The chains come down, and it is like Fort Knox. However, this report does not feature anybody's name on who Miller or Bitts talked with. And instead, they begin by saying that at 11:32 in 19 seconds, a white-colored vehicle with an illuminated light on the roof turns onto Cochran Street from Franklin, southbound. And so they continue to go through any vehicle that they said that they see, and they're reporting on the time and what the vehicle looked like, as well as if they went southbound, which way they turned. Miller and Bitts are doing this in the convenience store with a pad and paper. Again, none of those notes have ever surfaced. And while they're writing all of this down, again, we don't know why they decided to start with 11:32 and 19 seconds. But I can tell you why they stopped at 11:41 and 52 seconds. It's because the vehicle that they see on the camera is Aliquippa Officer Bitts. They see his trooper. It is observed turning onto Cochran Street right in front of, goes across Two Cousins' camera and makes a right there from Franklin Avenue and turns right to go then up the hill because Cochran Street becomes Keel. A couple notes that they really want to emphasize in this report is that at 11:35 and 56 seconds, a Chevy Traverse comes to Cochran Street and Franklin Avenue and turns left onto Franklin Avenue. Remember that Keel Street then turns into Cochran, and same thing if you're going up the hill, it starts as being Cochran and then it turns into Keel. Cochran Street is maybe like a football field long. Then the other important time is the 11:37 and 37 seconds, where it says a Dodge minivan turns onto Cochran Street from under State Route 51. This vehicle is later determined to be Richardson, who is our 911 caller. So again, the 11:35 and 56 seconds, they don't just say that it's an SUV. They label it as a Chevy Traverse. And 11:37 and 37 seconds, they label this as a Dodge minivan. And then later says that that is the 911 caller. Based upon the review of the surveillance, according to Miller and Bitts, it was found that two vehicles came off Cochran Street and onto Franklin Avenue. That would mean that they're actually the ones coming down the hill, that there was only two cars, or vehicles rather. The remaining vehicles listed, out of all that are listed here, those remaining vehicles came from Franklin, okay, and then going up the hill then, coming from Franklin Avenue, making that right or making that left, depending on which way you were coming from, and that all the rest of the vehicles, other than two vehicles that were seen during this time, they were all seen going up. There's only two that are seen coming down and on surveillance. Again, this is a report that is typed up on May 20th, 2020. So that would be 4 days after the homicide, but 3 days after an arrest. So they are saying that they took all of these notes and they noted all of this when they were at Two Cousins convenience store at 1:30 in the morning. They were making all of these notes about all these vehicles and writing down all these descriptions and noting if they came from Cochran, if they came from Franklin. All of this was going on and began at 1:30 in the morning, allegedly. And it was because when Miller had arrived at 1 o'clock in the morning, he then started assigning people jobs. Okay, you two are going to interview the witnesses. That would be McGarry and Thomas. You're going to interview all the witnesses. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. So Miller took Bitts with him, allegedly, and they then, at 1:30, head down to this Two Convenience store that would have been closed for an hour and a half, okay, that they somehow get in to this store that's been closed for an hour and a half during COVID. And then you look at this report and you see that no name. Who did you talk to? And then how long do you think it would take to get all the information that they would have had to sit there once they finally get a hold of somebody, if this really truly did happen, to come and open up the store? How long do you think it would take to sit down and go through camera footage to the point that you're able to make all of these notes and notations? Michael Miller here closes out his report by saying that the call to 911 was placed at 11:39. Aliquippa was dispatched at 11:41. The Aliquippa Police Department, the police were close to the area at the time of the call and were observed on camera at 11:41 and 52 seconds responding to the call. And that finally, to note that this information would prove to be important later while at the residence noted on the driver's license found on the deceased. While at the residence, a Chevy Traverse was located in the driveway. So much of how and why they arrested Sheldon Jeter Jr. lied and relied heavily on this report that has no date and timestamp, and the action on top. This report that has no name of a person that they spoke with. This report has no additional footage showing them actually walking into the store to show this is when these two police officers go in to get this information. That this report that has no credibility as far as to prove that this actually ever happened at the time, at 1:30 in the morning that they're saying, there is nothing to back that this ever happened at 1:30 in the morning. And in fact, there's actually proof that shows that it didn't. And that proof would be a couple different reports. Report number 1 is our handy-dandy crime scene log entry. Just like how they take note of the time that you enter and you're there at the scene, they also take note of when you leave the scene. And Officer Alex Bitts, as well as in-charge man, Trooper PSP Michael Miller, they both do not leave that crime scene until 3:32 in the morning. There is no note of them leaving the crime scene at 1:30 and coming back. They were there the whole time until 3:30 in the morning. The second red flag and proof is that you hear it from your 911, Joe Richardson, in his interview state that one of the officers moved his vehicle. But it had to be after a certain point because Trombetta, when he got there, in his report, he said that when he got there, there were the two vehicles inside the tape. And he notes it as being a town and country. Well, on this report that they make after the fact, a Dodge minivan. Dodge and town and country, two totally different vehicles. But how could Alex Bitts be moving a vehicle that he testified to in court that he moved Joe Richardson's vehicle if he's at Two Cousins convenience store? It should also be noted that nowhere in Michael Miller's report does he ever say anything about that there was other ways to leave than coming down to be caught on that Two Cousins camera. There were other ways to leave Keel Street or leave where the crime scene was, and that would be to go back up the hill. That would also be to turn onto State Route 51 and never make it all the way down. And if you went the wrong way on, let's say, Highland Avenue. Also, the other way that you can leave is way later, after the crime scene would be cleared. Also, that evening, no other business was approached. So they, during this investigation and used in trial, the prosecutors, the police, they went out and got numerous businesses, their surveillance footage. Why didn't they look at the surveillance of, let's say, Dollar General that night? Why didn't they look at the footage of the Aliquippa Police Department from their cameras? Two Cousins was the only business that they went to that night, allegedly in the middle of the night at 1:30 in the morning. This report was so important for the prosecution. This tied everything together, because without this report, when they would have went to Sheldon Jeter Jr.'s home, which was the address that was on Pugh's driver's license, even though he didn't live there, but he still had it on his driver's license as he would come and go from back in 2014 when it was originally put on. It was never taken off. But the only purpose, the sole purpose, that going to Orchard Street, 127 Orchard Street that night at 3:30 in the morning was to give a death notice. That's the only reason that they were going to 127 Orchard Street that night, allegedly, to give a death notice. But yet, 6 troopers and police officers are needed to give a death notice? Seeing how important this report was for the prosecution, I spent a lot of time on this report. I spent a lot of time matching a lot of things up because a lot of other reports come from this report. This is a report that said, let's say that it never existed. Let's say that they didn't ever go to Two Cousins, which I believe that never happened, and I can prove that it never happened. But if they never went to Two Cousins to obtain this information, then how would Officer Bitts know that the Chevy Traverse was seen leaving the crime scene? The only way that that's possible is if you are following Sheldon Jeter Jr. around. In the interrogations or interviews of the witnesses that were at the crime scene that night, they are very interested to know what Brandon Waxler saw as far as, did you see any cars parked along the side of the road? Did you see anybody? Did you see anybody in the gravel, a parking lot where the church was? They are very interested to know if he saw any cars, anybody in vehicles. Why?
When you're getting off the exit to come up the hill, did you see any cars making a right on the 51 like they're going to go towards Ambridge?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Did you see anybody standing out or out along the road or out on the porch down there or anything like that?
Down there at the bottom of the hill?
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
The only cars and only people that were staying down there were people actually on the main street of Aliquippa.
Franklin there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I only saw those cars there because they're always there, and I saw them driving to the exit here.
Do you remember any of those cars?
It is impossible
Colors,
for Brandon Waxler to see anything on Franklin
anything like
Avenue if he got off at the Keel
No.
Street exit.
They're there often, right there on the main road, Franklin.
Yeah.
Like right where that first building is on your left.
Mm-hmm.
Those cars are always there.
Did you see anybody standing around or driving those cars? Was anybody in the car? Those cars?
I don't know if anybody was in the cars. They were a little too far away to see through the windows, but
Okay.
yeah, those are the only cars or people I saw right there on the main drag. I mean, as far as coming up the hill here to where I saw the body, no, there was no one standing around, no cars, nothing.
Okay. When you came back, the other gentleman that's in the van was already on 911, right?
Yes.
So you didn't use your phone at all during this
No, I didn't.
incident? Okay.
They are making sure that there's no digital traces. Also, Brandon is saying that the guy was calling 911 when he got back. All other reports indicate that he had already called 911, so he wouldn't have seen him calling 911. Another report that questions the authenticity of the statements made at trial that Officer Bitts and Trooper Miller went to Two Cousins at 1:30 in the morning and did all that surveillance searching is Trooper Miller was in charge of this investigation and tasking people with different things to do, tasking different troopers with things to do. And Trooper Ryan Broder, on May 16th at approximately 1:50 in the morning, he was tasked with assisting in an area canvass for possible video and neighborhood interviews. This was given to Trooper Broder by Michael D. Muller. This would have been tasked to him verbally. There is no traffic radio of, he would have had to been at Two Cousins and then telling him to do this over the radio. Well, there'd be radio traffic of him barking out these orders and doing it over the radio. And that's just not there. So that means that at 1:50, when he was given these orders to go canvass the neighborhood, it would have been verbally and it would have been right in front of each other. Again, alluding to the fact that they were at the scene as the crime scene log would indicate when these orders were given out. This report states that this interview of Deidre Lee, again, was tasked at 1:50 in the morning. And then Broder says that at approximately 1:52 in the morning, Trooper Thomas and I spoke with Deidre Lee, who lives in a white 2-story single-family residence located in the rear lot of 226 Keel Street. Lee was wearing her pajamas and appeared to be asleep when we knocked on the door. Lee also appeared to be generally surprised to hear about an incident that occurred on her street. Lee stated she was asleep and never heard or saw anything reportedly stated that she would contact the state police if she hears anything at all. And again, this was approximately at 1:52 in the morning, and it was after being tasked at 1:50, because this residence was right there at the bottom of the hill, and that Trooper Thomas was with Ryan Broder when this occurred. Now, Trooper Thomas, prior to doing this, was interviewing on tape witness 1, 2, 3, and 4. Trooper Thomas was doing those interviews with McGeary.
Trooper Thomas, badge number 10847. Today's date's May 16th, 2020. Time is 0114 hours, or 114. Trooper Thomas, badge number 10847. Today's date, May 16th, 2020. Time is 0124 hours, or 124 a.m. Also present for the recording is Trooper McGeary.
Badge number 12871.
Sir, if you could state your full name for the...
Trooper Booker with the Pennsylvania State Police, badge number 12433. It's Saturday, May 16th, 2020 at 0132 hours. Sir, do you mind?
There was 4 witnesses. Brandon Waxler passes the body. Then he goes and gets Preston and Jean, the father and son combo, and then they come back. And he says that it would have happened just within 2 minutes. And that's when they see the van guy calling, or had called, 911. And there would be these 4 people that were interviewed. And this is the order that it happened. And these are the people that did the interviewing. So Max DeLuca interviews Preston, the son of Jean, the friend of Brandon Waxler, at approximately 12:45 in the morning. He said that this was assigned, Max DeLuca said this was assigned to him by Michael Miller. Well, Michael Miller isn't on scene until 1 a.m., according to all of the reports, meaning the entry log, as well as dispatch. Max DeLuca's interview was not recorded. Again, 12:45 a.m. Next up was Patrick Thomas, and he was in a vehicle, a trooper vehicle, with McGeary, 2 troopers, at 1:14 a.m., and they interviewed Waxler. Following that up with, at 1:24, again, same 2, Thomas and McGeary, interviewing Jean. And again, this was signed by Miller, who was in charge. With the final interview taking place at 1:32 a.m. 1:32 a.m. And that would be Broder interviewing Joe Richardson, the 911 caller, assigned by Miller. While all of these interviews are going on, as they are going to be coming to a close, it's going to put Thomas and Broder closing out right around the same time of 1:44 a.m., between Thomas being with Jean and then Broder being with Joe Richardson, the 911 caller. So when both of those are ending, it's right around the same time. As those are coming to an end at 1:40 in the morning, that begins Fenella processing the scene and beginning to take photographs of the crime scene. It is said to begin at 1:40 a.m. Now give a listen to when Joe Richardson is asked about his vehicle being moved. And remember what time this interview started, 1:32 in the morning. Let's take a listen.
Okay. So, I mean, basically, where your van's parked at right now, just past the body, is that where you stopped at? Did you move the car at all after?
They did, yeah.
Right here, Broder is saying that when he is interviewing him, that the van is just right past the body. The van is just literally right past the body. Listen again.
Where your van's parked at right now, just past the body, is that where you stopped at?
Where your van is parked at right now, just past the body.
Where your van's parked at right now, just past the body, is that where you stopped at?
That would mean that while Broader is giving this interview, or I should say taking this interview, the van is parked right past the body because he is looking at it when he is speaking. Where the van is parked right now, right past the body, that would mean in present current time that that's where the van was. And that would just be after 1:32. So the interview at this point would have gone on for 3.5 minutes. So 1:35. And remember, this is a 12-minute and 30-second interview. So if it starts at 1:32, it goes all the way until 1:44 and 30 seconds. And then therefore then Joe Richardson would then get out of the vehicle and he would then walk over to his van and get in it and just leave. But let's listen a little further.
Okay. So, I mean, basically, where your van's parked at right now, just past the body, is that where you stopped at? Did you move the car at all after?
They did, yeah. They moved.
Joe Richardson is saying that after he put the car, or his van rather, to block the body so that nobody would hit it, that then somebody then moved it. Well, this doesn't make any sense. Listen again.
Okay. So, I mean, basically, where your van's parked at right now, just past the body, is that where you stopped at? Did you move the car at all after?
They did, yeah. They moved it up.
Who did?
When I came in, my lights hit him. As soon as I hit him, I went across enough in case traffic came down the hill so nobody could run him over.
And who moved the vehicle?
One of the officers down there.
Okay.
They asked me if they could. I said, sure.
Where the vehicle, though, is right now in this interview is making it seem like it's right past the body. And then Joe Richardson says, well, then they moved it up. Well, then they moved it up. They moved it up. When was the vehicle moved up? The vehicle was said to have been just up in front of the body while this interview was being conducted at 1:32 a.m. So if the interviewer is asking, is that where you parked? And he's looking at the vehicle while he's asking this man questions, then the vehicle should be right in front of the body. But that's not the answer that's given. The answer that's given is that...
Okay. So, I mean, basically, where your van's parked at right now, just past the body, is that where you stopped at? Did you move the car at all after?
They did, yeah. They moved it up.
Who did?
When I came in, my lights hit him. As soon as I hit him, I went across enough in case traffic came down the hill so nobody could run him over.
Again, where your car is right now, just up in front of the body. That's what that means. That's where the van is allegedly when this is taking place. Then it gets moved up. Now, when that happens, because Joe Richardson's in the vehicle, in the trooper vehicle during this interview, so when that is moved, when would that have happened? And how would he give him permission while he's in the trooper vehicle doing this interview? Because the interviewer, Broader, is saying, where your car is right now, is that where you parked it? Well, yes. Did you move it? Well, they did. Who's they? The officers down there. Well, who instructed them to move it? And it must have happened after this interview, and that's when it did happen, so that it could get out of the way of all the pictures that were going to be taken at the crime scene, because whatever vehicle that was not going to match what vehicle was turning from Franklin to come on up to Keel Street. That van was moved out of the crime scene. Who ordered that? Why would anything be moved? And why wasn't it noted? Well, at the trial of Sheldon Jeter Jr., there was just one question, which was, who moved the van? Why did you move the van? And that would have been answered by Alex Bitts moved the van. But it was never broken down into this type of display in that courtroom during the trial of Sheldon Jeter Jr. to show all the inconsistencies with when that van was moved, who moved that van, and really why they had to move the van, which was because of the crime scene photos that were about to be taken. All would have been leading to reasonable doubt. Again, when you see these crime scene photos, you see the burgundy Kia SUV. And if you hear the order of the interviews, now before they were all audio recorded, they talked to all these people prior to, and then they recorded their statements. Brandon Waxler was done before, way before, Joe Richardson was done. You see Brandon Waxler's vehicle during the production of starting to begin those photos. And I'm going to show you. And during those photos, you see the SUV there. And then towards the end, when the rest of the photos were taken, the SUV is not there. The reason that the SUV is there is because 3 people drove in that SUV down to the crime scene. Gene was being interviewed at the same time almost, or just a couple minutes before that Joe Richardson was. They were 2 different officers. So Brandon Waxler had to wait until Gene was done with his interview. So that would mean that they started taking those pictures while Gene was being interviewed. Just like Joe Richardson started the interview at 1:32. Gene's started his interview at 1:24. Gene's took 12 and a half minutes to be recorded audio. Joe Richardson's 10 and a half, 12 and a half minutes. They're right around the same amount of time. But what I can prove is that those pictures at the crime scene began at a certain point because of Brandon Waxler's vehicle being there for some of them and then not being there for the rest of them. And that's because Brandon Waxler was done with his interview before those photos would have ever been taken. If they started at 1:40 in the morning, like you're going to see the evidence shows with reports and photos. Brandon Waxler was done at 1:24, right before Gene starts. He could have just left, right? Nope, he had to wait for Gene. He then waits for Gene, and then when Gene is done, Gene gets in the vehicle, and then they leave. You will see, though, that the 911 caller, no photos with that van anywhere, not to start it, like Brandon Waxler's. So that means that that van was moved before 1:40 in the morning, but yet after 12:06 in the morning because of Trombetta's report saying that he seen inside the tape 2 vehicles. So that vehicle was moved between after 12:06 and prior to that interview starting. So my question to Ryan Broader, Trooper PSP, who ends up playing a huge role in why Sheldon Jeter Jr. is arrested, is why is Ryan Broader acting like a vehicle is in front of a body when he is giving an interview? He's literally saying that right there where your car is parked just in front of the body, is that where it was? Did anybody move it? That doesn't make any sense. you couldn't possibly be seeing at 1:34 in the morning that van in front of the body at that point, because it wasn't there then. And the crime scene photos prove it. What they would go and lead to the jury to believe is that they moved that vehicle out of the way for the crime scene photos to be taken. Why then would the Kia not be moved as well? Why would anything be moved inside of a crime scene? That is contaminating and tampering with evidence. That crime scene was compromised so many times. Your next neighborhood canvas is going to consist of interviewing Keel Street resident 222 Keel Street, Carla, on 5/16/2020 at approximately 2:15 in the morning. Trooper Werner interviewed Carla regarding the shooting death of Tyric Pugh. Carla explained that she was home all day, including the evening of this incident. Carla advised she did dishes on the evening of the incident, as well as the air conditioning unit had been on. Therefore, she didn't hear any sirens or sounds of gunfire. No other details were provided during this interview. A couple things I noted while investigating or reinvestigating the case here was that this Trooper Werner's, that is Werner, this was assigned by Sergeant Fennella, Fennell. And the date of action, there is a date there. This report, though, was not typed up and made into a report until 5:30. So that'd be May 30th is when this gets typed up. And it literally consists of 2 sentences, 3 at max. And your next homicide investigation action report is done by Jennifer Cantella. And she was doing, again, neighborhood interviews, canvases as well. And on 5/16/2020, at approximately 2 a.m., she types up a report that says, I arrived in the area of the incident and was briefed on the known details at this time. She does not talk about any of those details. She just says that she was briefed on them and that she arrived at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was then assigned to assist Trooper Justin Werner with conducting neighborhood interviews, as in plural, S, along Keel Street. Refer to supplemental report by Trooper Werner detailing the contact with the neighbors. Again, and then this would be typed up and put into a report on May 19th. So on the 19th, Jennifer puts in her 3 sentences, and then Werner on May 30th puts in, his 3 sentences. And so both being assigned by Rick Fennell. The next report I want to discuss is Chad Savannah on 5/16/2020. His report states that he was contacted by Trooper Pickard and requested to respond to the area of 246 Keel Street, Aliquippa, to assist with processing the scene of a homicide. I arrived on scene at approximately 2:10 a.m. and met with Trooper Pickard, who related all the known facts at the current time. I assisted Trooper Pickard with the collection and packaging of the evidence at the scene. All evidence was then transported to PSP Beaver and entered into evidence under inventory number D04-7427. And this was typed up and put into a report on May 26th. So again, the homicide was the night of 5/15. It then becomes the middle of the night, so it goes over to 5/16. Okay, as I was looking at all these reports and doing them in chronological order, I then also went back and looked at the crime scene entry log. We have, obviously the 4 witnesses, Brandon, Joseph, Dwayne, and Eugene. Then you have Alex, Giovanni, Andrew, and Joseph. Alex, Giovanni, and Andrew. That's Alex Bitts, Giovanni Trello, and Andrew Galletti. Those are the Aliquippa police officers that are there, which they say from the beginning of, being on scene at like 11:42, and that they don't leave until 3:32. There's no reports that are written up and signed by Alex, Giovanni, or Andrew. Brandon, Joseph, Dwayne, and Eugene are your 4 witnesses that were interviewed well after the fact. And then we come into some of the fire, department, Joseph, Nathan, and Alex. Then I have John Lang, who's the police chief. He arrives allegedly at 12:10, but then the numbers get changed to 12:06. And then we get into, we have Childs, we have Clayton, McGeary, Ryan Broder, Patrick Thomas, Michael Miller, Sergeant Rick Fennell, and Trooper Pickard, Trooper DeLuca, Schmidt. Then we have the coroner. Then Chad Savannah, Daniel Smith, which again is all the way at the bottom, but yet he was there at 12:06 a.m. Obviously Trombetta started this log, and then just 3 more people, which was Jennifer Cantella, and then Abigail, and Michael, and those were the EMTs that arrived at like 3:02 and then left at 3:10. Again, the scene was cleared. Last person, 3:33 a.m. So basically, we're going to be heading on over to do this death notice, and no reports. What you just heard before is you got a couple reports in there to say that they opened or knocked on the door, rather, of a Deidre, a Carla, and that some people were called there to help process the scene. And then we're going to have a couple reports here that talk about what was then taken to the scene and how it was transported. But what's going to come in really heavily here is going to be the crime scene photos that show that the police were there before Brandon Waxler's vehicle. Before I get into showing these photos and what red flagged me, I do want to let everybody know that you have all these names, and that's a matter of what time they came into the the crime scene and what were they doing. You have a lot of standing around. At the end of the interviews that took place with the 4 witnesses, those 4 witnesses leave, which was well before 1:50 a.m. And you have from 1:50 a.m. until about 3:32, 3:33 when the scene was cleared. So again, 1:50 a.m. to 3:32 a.m. when the scene was cleared. However, some officers, some troopers, PSP, they were going to go give a death notice. And they were going to do that at the address that they found on Tyric Pugh, which was from his identification card, his ID, his government-issued ID card. And that address was 127 Orchard Street. Before we get into the 127 Orchard Street interviews that take place, it's important to note that the process of the scene that began at 1:40 a.m. So there was pictures being taken, as you will see, where you can see Brandon Waxler's SUV, the maroon vehicle. But in all of the photos, at no time can you see this van that was allegedly driven by Joe Richardson. But what you can see is a big dry patch. It looks like white, but it's actually it's a dry patch because whatever vehicle was there before it began raining. And then when this was moved, then you could see, because underneath it rained around it, but the car protect part of the pavement to then not be, wet. You're going to notice that in many stills when they were taking the crime scene photos. And what I was able to compare was, what did it look like under Brandon Waxler's vehicle? Because he was there just moments after Joe Richardson had called 911. So Brandon Waxler and, Gene and his son, they were all in the same vehicle coming back down the hill to the scene. They were there supposedly before the police. You can see right here that underneath the police vehicle that pulls up, the first one, it's clear as day to see that it is dry underneath. It is dry underneath the vehicle, which means that vehicle was there before it started raining. And this was never talked about in trial. It was never talked about ever until right here today. So if we're talking about a timeline, what I did is I took the 3 vehicles. You have Joe Richardson's van that no one could ever see, but yet you have this patch here. That's where allegedly his vehicle was. So we definitely can point to the fact that there was a vehicle there. Is it the van? No, we don't know that because it's not in the picture. Then we could point over here to, this is where Brandon Waxler said when he came back down the hill, that's where then his car rested. Now, throughout the different crime scene photos, you see the maroon vehicle there, and it's there for so many, and then all of a sudden, the vehicle isn't there anymore. It's because then during the process of the scene and when they're taking these photos, once they're all done with their interviews, then they get back in Brandon Waxler's, SUV, and then they leave. And then they leave, though, like that vehicle is inside the tape. So they're moving then that vehicle outside of the tape, and you can see based on the crime scene photos that has it there, the vehicle. And then as the shots progress, then you can notice that, okay, there's no more vehicle there. So what I went ahead and looked at was the pavement. What did the pavement look like? Because that pavement should be dry, just like the patch from the van, just like the patch underneath the police car. And that's where the huge discrepancy comes in, is that it's not. It's wet underneath Brandon Waxler's vehicle. The only way that it could be wet underneath the vehicle is if the vehicle arrived after all the pavement was wet. And that would actually bring up a great point when you're going to be talking about what time did Brandon Waxler really come back to that body. If you go off of the timestamp of the 319 Keel Street camera, it comes up later in the investigation, it would mirror a very different picture, but would prove to be true because of science. The 319 Keel Street camera was labeled as being off and behind by 43 minutes, and then by trial it was like 28 minutes. But that is something you cannot argue is science. You can see clear as day, it's dry where the alleged vehicle was that was moved, that they say was a van that was moved out of the way, but it was definitely there before it started raining because it's dry underneath. The police vehicle, it's dry underneath. That means it was there before it started raining. And then I wanted to take a look at Tyric Pugh, and was it dry or wet underneath his body? and it was dry underneath Tyric Pugh's body. That means that you got the police vehicle there, you got the alleged whatever vehicle was moved up out of the way. They want to say it was Joe Richardson's van. Well, we don't know that, but that's what they want to say. It wasn't any crime scene photos. We don't know what vehicle was there. But those two vehicles, the police vehicle and that vehicle that was just past the body, they were all there when it was dry. And that should have been the same if Brandon Waxler was there before the police got there. Then it should be dry underneath his vehicle as well, because it's dry underneath the police vehicle. And he allegedly his vehicle came down the hill and was there prior to the police arriving. But that is not what the science tells us, because it's wet, which means their whole timeline is now in question based off of science. I think this brings us back completely to the beginning, when you go ahead and you examine and you see, okay, wow, we have an issue here. It is wet underneath Brandon Waxler's vehicle. It's dry underneath the police vehicles. That's not possible. Meaning that Brandon Waxler arriving before the police is not possible. So then you go back and you actually look at the crime scene entry logs, and you look at the dispatch and what transpired. And it just brings me back to the fact that Alex Bitts, okay, yes, he was working. Galletti was not dispatched. What vehicle was first? What vehicle is seen? Is that the vehicle of Galletti? Is that a vehicle of Trombetta? Is that Bitts's? But ultimately, if you go back to the beginning and you look at how everything played out with this 911 call, the 911 caller, it traces back to Harmony Road, Baden. So right there, an inconsistency if he's supposed to be standing over the body. Then the 911 caller's van is miraculously moved by one of the police officers to make sure that it's out of the pictures of the crime scene photos. Then the person that arrives on scene first, Bitts, he isn't the one that calls in the DOA. He waits for Trello, who's, Bitts is there, sees the body clearly. Tyric Pugh is not with us anymore. And he's not the one that calls in the DOA. Trello does. So what was Bitts doing for 2 minutes before Trello calls in the DOA? And I think that when you mix all of this together, the science with that it's wet under cars that shouldn't be, it's dry under the police vehicles, saying that it was there before Brandon Waxler's vehicle. The 911 caller not thinking that the gentleman was hit by a vehicle, when clearly he has, 6 gunshot wounds in his head. When you put all of that together, and the 911 caller was in Baden, that's where it traced back to. And you put all these inconsistencies together to the point of, you listen to everybody's interviews like we have, and you got supposedly muffled shots. They're telling you, the Aldridges are saying that this happened around midnight. And that's when they thought that they went back down there. And so you add up all these inconsistencies to the point of, this is all inconsistencies within the first 2 hours, 3 hours of being investigated. But all these inconsistencies, were they brought up in court? Were they brought up at trial? And the answer is no, they weren't. Were they, challenged? And the answer is no. And that's a huge problem. And had they been challenged, I think that the jury sees a lot of different things in a lot of different light. Mainly being that the cops were there before Brandon Waxler was there, period. Next on Sunset Secrets, we're going to be talking about the interviews that took place at 127 Orchard Street. PSP and Aliquippa said that they were going to give a death notice, and it was anything but a death notice.
15th, 2020 at 04:11 hours in the morning. Sir, can you state your full name and date of birth for me?
Michael Morley.
And how did you know the deceased?
My family. He used my father's address when his mother moved out. We've been on him. We've been on him all his life. And he comes there at night, a lot of nights, a lot of days, because that's what he does. He uses that as his residence.
And that's the 127 that we're here in front of right now.
127 Orchard Street. When he got problems, he'll call me. When he's happy, he calls me.